During a dinner at a restaurant, the millionaire was paralyzed when he saw that the waitress was identical to his wife who had died 20 years ago. He approached. Elliot Parker stared out of the large bay window of his Savannah mansion, the golden glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the polished floors. The view outside was breathtaking. A sprawling garden with neatly trimmed hedges, a fountain that sparkled in the light, and the river just beyond, glinting with the colors of dusk. Yet, despite the serene beauty around him, Elliot felt an emptiness that the luxury couldn't fill. It had been 2 decades since he lost Lydia, the love of his life, in a car accident. 20 years of success, deals, and awards. But all of it had only built a facade that masked the void in his heart. He had tried to move on, traveled the world, built his company into a giant. But the memories of Lydia lingered. Her laughter, her touch, the way she would playfully steal his newspaper at breakfast just to get his attention. No matter how many meetings he attended or how many nights he spent at charity galas, it was always her face that he saw in quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded away. That evening, feeling particularly restless, he decided to dine at one of Savannah's upscale restaurants, hoping that a change of scenery might help. As he walked into the dimly lit dining room, the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses created a comforting background noise. He settled into a corner table, ordered his usual steak, medium rare, and tried to focus on his phone, scrolling through emails and updates from his business associates. But then, a flash of movement caught his eye. He looked up, and for a moment, his heart stopped. A young waitress carrying a tray of dishes walked across the room with a grace that was eerily familiar. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, cascaded down her back, and when she turned slightly, he saw her profile, soft, delicate features, and eyes that held a quiet determination. It was as if he was seeing Lydia again, after all these years. Elliot blinked, convinced that his mind was playing tricks on him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the racing of his heart, but the resemblance was undeniable. He watched her move from table to table, her smile polite as she spoke to customers. It was more than just the physical similarity. It was the way she moved, the tilt of her head, the gentle curve of her lips. Everything about her stirred memories he thought he had buried. Unable to resist, he motioned for her to come over. She approached with a warm, professional smile, balancing a notepad in one hand. "Good evening, sir. Is there anything I can get you?" Elliot struggled to find his voice. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. The young woman seemed surprised by the question, but answered, "Naomi. Naomi Bennett." "Naomi," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. He forced a smile, trying to mask the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "It's nice to meet you, Naomi." She gave him a curious glance, clearly wondering why a wealthy patron like him was so interested in a simple waitress. "Nice to meet you too, sir. I'll be back with your order shortly." As she walked away, Elliot found himself captivated. He couldn't shake the thought that there was something more to this than mere coincidence. He couldn't dismiss the idea that perhaps, against all odds, Naomi was somehow connected to Lydia. The memories of Lydia's pregnancy flooded back, how she had been excited about becoming a mother, about their future together as a family. And then, that terrible night, when she disappeared, leaving behind a gaping wound in his life. He had never found out what happened to the baby she was carrying. All he knew was that Lydia vanished without a trace, and every search effort, every private investigator, had come up empty. For years, he had blamed himself for not being able to save her or their unborn child. The thought that maybe, just maybe, Naomi could be that child was like a flame in the darkness. Elliot finished his dinner in silence, his mind racing with possibilities. As he paid the bill and left the restaurant, he couldn't stop thinking about Naomi's face, her voice, the strange sense of familiarity that had washed over him. He decided then and there that he needed to know more about her, who she was, where she came from, and why she reminded him so painfully of the woman he had loved and lost. The next day, he made some calls. A private investigator he had used before owed him a favor. and Elliot asked him to look into Naomi's background. He needed to know everything: where she was born, where she grew up, and whether there was any connection to the life he once dreamed of with Lydia. He wasn't sure if he was chasing ghosts or if this was the answer he had been searching for all these years. As he sat back in his office that evening, staring at a photo of Lydia that still graced his desk, he whispered to himself, maybe it's time for some answers. Elliot sat at his desk, his gaze drifting back to the photo of Lydia that he kept in a silver frame, positioned carefully beside his computer monitor. The private investigator had promised to gather information on Naomi's background as quickly as possible, but the waiting gnawed at him. He had always been a man of action, someone who made things happen rather than waiting for them to unfold. But this was different. It felt as though he was on the edge of discovering something that could change his life forever. Days passed, and Elliot tried to focus on work, but his thoughts kept circling back to Naomi. The way she moved, the way her eyes lit up when she smiled, it was all too familiar, and yet she was a stranger. He couldn't help but wonder what her story was. Why had she been raised in an orphanage? Why did she end up working as a waitress in Savannah, of all places? And most importantly, why did she look so much like Lydia? One afternoon, as he sat in a boardroom, surrounded by associates discussing a potential merger, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a text from the investigator. "I have information. Meet me at your office at 6 p.m. Elliot barely heard the rest of the meeting, his mind already racing ahead. As soon as it ended, he excused himself, claiming a prior engagement, and rushed back to his office. The investigator was waiting for him when he arrived, a man in his early 50s with a worn leather briefcase and an expression that suggested he'd seen more than his share of secrets. They settled into Elliot's office. The door closed tight behind them. The investigator spread a few papers on the desk, but Elliot's focus was on a single manila folder labeled Naomi Bennett. "She's 23 years old," the investigator began, his voice low and professional. "Born in a small town up north, parents unknown. She was found on the steps of a church in a basket when she was just a few weeks old. The nuns named her Naomi." Elliot felt a chill run down his spine. The timeline made sense. 23 years ago, Lydia had disappeared when she was 8 months pregnant. "And the adoption?" he pressed, leaning forward, his hands clenching the edge of the desk. The investigator shook his head. "She wasn't adopted. She grew up in the church's orphanage until she turned 18. After that, she moved around, doing odd jobs, eventually settling here in Savannah about a year ago." Elliot's mind raced. It wasn't definitive proof. There was still so much he didn't know. But the pieces were starting to align in a way that felt too perfect to be mere coincidence. He picked up the photograph the investigator had included in the file. Naomi as a child, standing in front of the church, her eyes wide and curious, her hair a wild tangle. It was the same smile, the same expression he remembered from Lydia's youth. "Is there any record of who left her at the church?" Elliot asked, though he already suspected the answer. No records, no witnesses, just a note saying her name was Naomi and that she had no family. Elliot's heart sank a little, but he refused to give up. There had to be a connection, a reason why Naomi seemed so familiar. He would find out what it was, no matter how deep he had to dig. He thanked the investigator, paid him, and then sat alone in his office, turning over the pieces of the mystery in his mind. That evening, Elliot called Naomi and asked her to meet him for dinner the next night, using a business pretext. She agreed, sounding slightly puzzled but willing. Elliot hoped he could find a way to ask her more about her past without revealing his true intentions. He knew he had to tread carefully. This wasn't just about satisfying his curiosity. It was about understanding if Naomi could truly be the daughter he had believed was lost forever. The next evening, Elliot arrived early at the restaurant, choosing a table with a view of the river. He barely noticed the picturesque setting, his mind too preoccupied with the conversation to come. When Naomi arrived, she was dressed simply but neatly, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, a hint of nervousness in her eyes as she greeted him. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Parker," she said, smiling politely. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Not at all, Naomi, and please, call me Elliot," he replied, gesturing for her to sit. He could see the curiosity in her eyes, the unasked questions lingering in her mind. He decided to ease into the conversation, asking about her work and how she liked Savannah. They chatted casually for a while, but Elliot's thoughts kept circling back to the questions he was burning to ask. He finally decided to steer the conversation toward her past. "You mentioned before that you grew up in an orphanage," he said gently, watching her reaction. "It must have been difficult." Naomi looked down, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. "It had its challenges," she admitted, her voice softer. "But the nuns were kind, and I had friends. It wasn't a bad childhood, just lonely sometimes." Elliot nodded, trying to gauge her emotions. "Do you ever think about finding out more about your birth parents, where you come from?" Naomi hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "Sometimes I wonder," she confessed. "But I don't really know where to start. And part of me is scared, I guess. What if they didn't want me?" Her words struck a chord with Elliot, bringing back memories of his own doubts and fears after Lydia's disappearance. He had spent years wondering if there was something he could have done differently, if somehow he could have prevented their separation. He reached out across the table, his hand hovering just above hers, as if offering comfort but unsure if it would be welcomed. "I think," he said slowly, "that sometimes the past comes back to us in unexpected ways. And maybe, just maybe, it's worth exploring those questions, even if the answers might be painful." Naomi met his gaze, her expression thoughtful. And for a moment, Elliot thought he saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, like the first step towards something neither of them fully understood yet. As they finished their meal, Elliot knew that he couldn't rest until he uncovered the truth about Naomi's past, even if it meant revisiting the darkest moments of his own. He just hoped that, whatever he found, it wouldn't be too late to make things right. The next few weeks passed in a blur of unanswered questions and growing tension. Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of a revelation that would change everything. Yet, as much as he wanted to confront Naomi directly about his suspicions, he knew that he had to be patient. Rushing the truth could scare her away, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing the fragile connection they were beginning to build. Naomi, on the other hand, found herself increasingly curious about her new employer. Elliot treated her with a kindness that seemed to go beyond the professional, but there was a sadness in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. She often caught him looking at her with a wistful expression, as if seeing someone else through her. It made her wonder if perhaps he, too, carried unspoken burdens. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Elliot invited Naomi to join him for dinner at his home. She hesitated at first. Dining at her boss's mansion seemed far from ordinary, but eventually, she agreed. When she arrived, the grandness of the estate took her breath away. The sprawling gardens, the antique furniture, and the art that adorned the walls all spoke of a life lived in luxury. Yet there was a palpable emptiness in the air, as if the house had been waiting too long for laughter to return. They shared a simple meal in the dining room, and Naomi found herself feeling more at ease than she expected. She talked about her time in the orphanage, the friends she made there, and how she always felt like there was a piece of her story missing. Elliot listened attentively, carefully hiding the surge of emotions that her words stirred in him. As the conversation flowed, Naomi finally mustered the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Why did you decide to hire me, Mr. Parker? I mean, as your assistant. I'm sure you could have found someone with more experience." Elliot hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I guess you reminded me of someone I once knew," he said softly, his gaze drifting toward the portrait of Lydia that hung on the far wall. "Someone who meant a great deal to me." Naomi followed his gaze, her eyes landing on the portrait. The woman in the painting had the same chestnut hair, the same gentle smile. She looked so much like Naomi that it sent a shiver down her spine. "Is that your wife?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elliot nodded, his expression distant. "Her name was Lydia. She passed away many years ago." He paused, his voice catching on the words. "She was pregnant when she died. We lost the baby too." Naomi felt a pang of sympathy. She had always wondered about her own parents, about what circumstances had led to her being left at the orphanage. She couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Elliot to lose both his wife and child. "I'm so sorry, Elliot," she said sincerely, the formalities slipping away as they shared this moment of vulnerability. He offered her a small, grateful smile, but his mind was already racing with what he hadn't said. The possibility that Naomi might be the child he had lost was like a drumbeat in the back of his thoughts, growing louder with every passing day. After dinner, they moved to the library, where Elliot poured them both a glass of wine. He hesitated for a moment before pulling out a small box from a drawer. "I found this recently," he said, handing it to Naomi. "It's some of Lydia's things. I thought, maybe you'd like to see them." Naomi opened the box carefully, feeling the weight of its significance even though she didn't fully understand why. Inside, there were letters, a silver locket, and a few photographs. She picked up one of the photos, which showed Lydia standing in front of a lake, her hand resting gently on her pregnant belly. "She looks so happy," Naomi said quietly, her fingers tracing the edges of the photograph. "You must miss her a lot." Elliot's throat tightened. "Every day," he replied, his voice barely audible. He watched Naomi's reaction closely, wondering if she felt the same strange sense of connection that he did. But she only looked thoughtful, as if trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't know she was part of. As the evening drew to a close, Elliot escorted Naomi to the door, feeling a renewed sense of urgency. He knew he couldn't wait much longer to uncover the truth about her past. He needed answers, and he needed them soon. The next morning, Elliot made another call to his investigator, pressing for more details about the church where Naomi was found and any possible records that might have been overlooked. He also instructed his lawyer to discreetly set up a DNA test, hoping that Naomi would agree to it without too many questions. He couldn't bring himself to tell her his suspicions directly. Not yet. But he hoped that with the right approach, she would understand why it was so important to him. Meanwhile, Naomi couldn't stop thinking about the evening she had spent at Elliot's home. She had always felt like she didn't quite belong anywhere, like she was drifting through life without roots. But with Elliot, there was a sense of belonging that she couldn't explain. It was strange, but comforting, and it made her want to trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in a long time. Over the next few days, Elliot found excuses to spend more time with Naomi, visiting the office together, discussing business strategies over coffee, or simply walking through the gardens of his estate. They both felt the shift in their dynamic, a growing closeness that seemed to transcend the professional boundaries between employer and employee. Naomi appreciated his kindness and the way he seemed to see beyond her role as a waitress or assistant, while Elliot saw in her a light that he had thought was lost forever. But with every moment they shared, the weight of the secret Elliot was carrying grew heavier. He knew that soon, the time would come to tell her everything, to share his suspicions, his hopes, and the dark truth he had uncovered about Lydia's death. He just prayed that when the moment came, it wouldn't tear them apart. As Elliot watched Naomi laughing at something he said one afternoon, her smile so similar to Lydia's, he felt a pang of fear mixed with a sliver of hope. He had spent 20 years haunted by loss, and now, for the first time in a long time, he dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something new. Elliot's anticipation was reaching a fever pitch. As the days passed, he found himself constantly checking his phone for updates from the investigator or the results from the DNA test. Each moment spent with Naomi made him feel closer to her. Yet the weight of his unspoken suspicions loomed larger with every interaction. He wanted to tell her the truth, about Lydia, about the possibility that she might be his daughter. But fear held him back. What if he was wrong? What if this discovery shattered whatever connection they had begun to build? One late afternoon, Elliot's phone buzzed with an incoming call as he sat in his office. It was the investigator. Elliot's heart pounded as he answered, his voice strained with barely contained urgency. "What did you find?" The investigator's voice came through the line, rough and businesslike. "I went back through the records at the church where Naomi was found. Turns out there were a few discrepancies in the paperwork. It's unusual, almost like someone wanted to make sure no one would trace her origin." Elliot leaned forward in his chair, his grip tightening around the phone. "What do you mean?" "There's no record of who left her there. But I found something else. An old letter in the church's archives, dated around the time she would have been left there. It was anonymous, but it had a warning. For her safety, do not try to find her family. It's strange, Mr. Parker. It's like whoever left her didn't want her to be found." Elliot's mind raced. The warning was cryptic, but it aligned with the growing sense he had that Naomi's past was tangled with his own. The more he uncovered, the more he was convinced that Russell had orchestrated something far darker than he had ever imagined. He thanked the investigator and ended the call, his thoughts turning to Lydia's brother and the secrets he had kept for so long. That evening, Elliot invited Naomi to join him for dinner again, this time suggesting they order takeout and enjoy it in the garden. Naomi accepted, touched by the gesture, and they spent the evening under the glow of garden lights, surrounded by the soft hum of crickets and the distant murmur of the river. As they ate, Naomi noticed that Elliot seemed more distracted than usual, as if something heavy was weighing on his mind. She watched him closely, wondering if he would finally tell her what had been bothering him. "You seem distant tonight, Elliot," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" He looked at her, his expression conflicted. For a moment, he considered telling her everything right then and there, but he stopped himself. Instead, he took a deep breath and tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. "Naomi, I've been thinking about your past, about how you grew up without knowing your real family. It must have been incredibly difficult, not knowing where you came from." She nodded, her gaze turning thoughtful as she looked up at the star-filled sky. "It was hard sometimes. I used to imagine what my parents might have been like, whether they left me because they had no choice or because they didn't want me. But after a while, I just accepted that I might never know." Elliot's heart ached at her words. He could hear the pain in her voice, the longing for answers that had been buried for years. He wished he could tell her that she wasn't alone, that there was someone who had been searching for her all this time, even if he hadn't known it until recently. "I think sometimes people are separated for reasons beyond their control," he said carefully, choosing his words as if each one could break a fragile thread between them. "But that doesn't mean they stop caring, or that they don't want to find each other again." Naomi glanced at him, curiosity flashing in her eyes. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Elliot forced a smile, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "Maybe I am. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." Their conversation drifted into lighter topics after that, but the tension lingered in the air between them. Elliot knew he couldn't keep the truth hidden much longer. Naomi deserved to know, and he owed it to Lydia's memory to uncover the full story. He just needed the right moment to tell her, to find the courage to lay bare his suspicions and hope that she would understand. The next day, Elliot received an email from his lawyer confirming that the DNA test results would be ready soon. He paced his office, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation gnawing at him. He could barely focus on work, his mind running through every possible scenario of what the results might reveal. As evening approached, he decided to visit the old family home where he and Lydia had lived during the early years of their marriage. The house had been left untouched since her death, a mausoleum to a life he had once dreamed of. He wandered through the dusty rooms, each one filled with memories of Lydia. Her laughter in the kitchen, her favorite spot by the window where she would read, the nursery they had decorated together, never knowing it would remain empty. In the back of a closet, he found an old box that he hadn't opened in years. Inside were mementos of their time together, including a letter Lydia had written to him shortly before her disappearance. His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper, recognizing her familiar handwriting. The words were filled with hope and love. But at the end of the letter, there was a line that sent a chill through him. "I know Russell doesn't approve of us, but I believe that our love is strong enough to overcome anything. I just hope he can find it in his heart to accept our child. I don't know what I would do if something happened." Elliot read the letter over and over, the implications sinking in deeper with each pass. He had known that Russell had never liked him, never approved of Lydia marrying an outsider, someone who didn't come from the same privileged background. But could his resentment have run so deep that he would harm his own sister? The pieces were starting to fall into place, but it was a puzzle that revealed a darker truth than he had imagined. Determined, Elliot decided that he would confront Russell. He would demand answers, no matter the consequences. And once he had those answers, he would finally sit down with Naomi and tell her everything, about Lydia, about the suspicions he held, and about the painful possibility that had been haunting him since the day they met. As he left the house, Elliot felt a sense of resolution settle over him. He knew that the next steps would be difficult, and that there was a chance he might lose Naomi if she couldn't accept what he had to say. But he also knew that he couldn't keep living with the uncertainty. And he couldn't let Russell's actions remain buried in the shadows. Elliot climbed into his car and drove back toward Savannah, the night sky stretching out above him like a promise of a new beginning. He could only hope that the truth, however painful, would bring him and Naomi the closure they both desperately needed. Elliot sat in his office the next morning, trying to focus on the files piled up on his desk, but his thoughts kept drifting to the confrontation he knew he had to face. His hands tightened around the edge of the desk as he considered what might happen. Russell was a dangerous man. Elliot had always known that. But now, with the suspicion that Russell might have been behind Lydia's death, the stakes felt even higher. By mid-morning, he could no longer stand the uncertainty. He called Russell, his voice steady but with a sharp edge. "Russell, we need to talk. It's about Lydia." There was a long pause on the other end before Russell finally replied, his tone guarded. "I'm not sure what there is left to say, Elliot. It's been 20 years. Elliot swallowed the anger that rose in his throat. "I think you know exactly what I want to talk about. Meet me at the old family estate tonight. We'll settle this once and for all." Another silence, longer this time, and then Russell's voice came through, colder than before. "Fine, I'll be there. But don't expect to like what you find." The line went dead, and Elliot took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He didn't know what to expect from the meeting, but he was prepared for a confrontation, prepared to dig into the truths that Russell had kept hidden for so long. He only hoped that he could control his anger long enough to get the answers he needed. As the afternoon dragged on, Elliot received another call, this time from his lawyer. The DNA test results were ready. Elliot's hands shook as he opened the email, his breath catching when he read the words on the screen. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. He stared at the words, barely able to process their meaning. Naomi was his daughter. She was the child Lydia had carried, the child he had thought lost forever. A wave of emotion crashed over him, relief, joy, regret, and a fierce determination to protect her from whatever danger Russell might pose. But he couldn't tell Naomi yet, not until he understood the full story behind Lydia's death and what role Russell had played. He needed to make sure that when he revealed the truth to Naomi, it would be the beginning of a new chapter, not the start of more heartache. As the sun set, Elliot drove out to the family estate, his mind racing with the possibilities of what might unfold. The old house loomed in the distance, dark and silent, a relic of a time when he had believed in a future filled with love and family. Now, it felt like the setting for a final reckoning. When he arrived, Russell was already there, leaning against his car with a cigarette in hand, his expression unreadable. He straightened as Elliot approached, exhaling a cloud of smoke that lingered in the cool night air. "You look like hell, Elliot," Russell said with a smirk. "What's this all about?" Elliot ignored the jab, his focus laser-sharp. "You know exactly what it's about. It's about Lydia, and it's about Naomi." At the mention of Naomi, Russell's expression flickered, a shadow passing over his face. He took another drag of his cigarette, but his hands were no longer steady. "What about her?" "I know you were involved in Lydia's disappearance," Elliot said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "I found the letters she wrote before she died. I know you never approved of our marriage, Borg, but I never imagined you'd go so far as to hurt your own sister." Russell's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped. But there was a tremor in his voice, a crack in his usual calm facade that told Elliot he was on the right track. "Maybe not," Elliot replied, taking a step closer. "But I do know that Naomi is my daughter, the daughter Lydia was carrying when she disappeared. And I know you had something to do with hiding her away." For a moment, Russell was silent, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the empty night. "You think you've pieced it all together, don't you? You think you're so smart, Elliot, but you don't know the half of it." Elliot's patience snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing Russell by the collar of his coat, his face inches from the other man's. "Tell me what you did to Lydia," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me why she's dead and why you hid my daughter from me." Russell struggled against his grip, but Elliot held firm, the fury of 2 decades of grief and loss boiling over. Finally, Russell stopped fighting and met Elliot's gaze with a defiant glare. "Fine. You want the truth? Lydia was going to ruin everything. She wanted to run away, take you and that child and leave the family behind. She didn't understand what she was giving up, what she was throwing away." Elliot's grip tightened, his knuckles white with the effort to keep his rage in check. "So, you killed her? You took my child and hid her away in an orphanage like she was some kind of burden?" Russell sneered, but there was fear in his eyes now. "I did what had to be done. The family couldn't afford a scandal, couldn't afford you dragging us down with your little romance. She got into that car herself, Elliot. I just made sure she never came back." Elliot released Russell, shoving him back against the car with a disgusted snarl. He felt like he was going to be sick. The truth was even more horrible than he had imagined. The realization that Russell had destroyed his family out of pure greed and spite. He took a step back, trying to steady his breathing, but the images of Lydia's smiling face, of Naomi as a baby, flashed through his mind. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Elliot whispered, his voice shaking with a mixture of fury and grief. "You took everything from me, from her, and for what? To protect your precious reputation." Russell's face twisted with a sneer, but Elliot saw the fear beneath it, the realization that his power was slipping away. "What are you going to do, Elliot? Go to the police? Who do you think they'll believe? Me or some grieving widower with a vendetta?" Elliot stepped closer, his expression hardening. "I'm not going to the police, Russell. Not yet. First, I'm going to make sure Naomi is safe. Then, I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done, every last bit of it." Before Russell could respond, Elliot turned on his heel and walked back to his car, leaving his brother-in-law standing alone in the darkness. As he drove away, he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The truth was out, the pieces of the past laid bare. Now, it was time to tell Naomi everything and hope that she could forgive him for keeping the secret this long. But even as he headed back toward Savannah, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over yet. Russell was desperate, cornered, and dangerous. Elliot only prayed that he could get to Naomi before Russell did something that would cost them both even more. Elliot barely slept that night. His mind was a storm of thoughts, each one more frantic than the last. He kept replaying his confrontation with Russell, the bitter words and the chilling admission that Lydia's death hadn't been an accident. But more than that, he couldn't stop thinking about Naomi, about how he would finally reveal the truth to her, and how she might react when she learned that the father she never knew had been so close all this time. The next morning, Elliot called Naomi, asking if she could meet him at his estate. His voice must have betrayed some of the urgency he felt because Naomi seemed concerned. "Is everything okay, Elliot?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. He forced a reassuring tone, though his heart pounded in his chest. There's something important I need to talk to you about. It's about your past and mine." Naomi hesitated, sensing the gravity in his words. "All right. I'll be there as soon as I can." After ending the call, Elliot paced his study, glancing repeatedly at the DNA results that lay on his desk. He had rehearsed how he might tell Naomi, but none of the words felt right. How did you tell someone that you were their father? That their entire life had been shaped by a lie? A betrayal orchestrated by a man they'd never even known? When Naomi arrived, Elliot met her at the door. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern, her expression softening when she saw the strain on his face. "Elliot, what's going on? You're scaring me." He led her into the study, gesturing for her to sit down. "Naomi, there's a lot that I need to tell you. Things that I should have told you sooner, but I wasn't sure until now." She watched him carefully, folding her hands in her lap, her fingers twisting nervously. "You're starting to sound like one of those crime shows. Is this about my parents?" Elliot nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "Yes, it is. It's about your mother and your father." Naomi frowned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I don't understand. I thought you said you didn't know anything about my family." Elliot ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of years of grief and loss pressing down on him. "I thought I didn't. But then I met you, and everything changed. You reminded me so much of someone I lost a long time ago. My wife, Lydia." Naomi's brow furrowed as she tried to follow his words, but Elliot could see the confusion in her eyes. He reached for the manila folder on his desk, the DNA test results inside, and handed it to her. "Please, just read this." She took the folder, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Her eyes scanned the page, and Elliot watched as the realization dawned on her, the color draining from her face. She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and shock. "Elliot, are you saying?" Elliot nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Naomi, you're my daughter. Lydia was your mother." For a moment, Naomi just stared at him, as if the world had tilted on its axis and she was struggling to regain her balance. She stood abruptly, turning away from him, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. "No, this can't be true. My mother died in a car accident. I don't understand." Elliot moved closer, his heart breaking at the pain in her voice. "It's true, Naomi. I didn't know you survived until recently. I didn't know that you were alive. I thought I had lost you both." Naomi's hands flew to her face, and Elliot could see the tears streaming down her cheeks. "But why? Why didn't anyone tell me? Why was I left in that orphanage with no one?" Elliot hesitated, knowing that the next part would be the hardest. "It's because of Russell, Lydia's brother. He was the one who hid you away. He's the reason Lydia never made it back to me." Naomi turned to face him, her expression raw with pain and confusion. "What are you saying? Are you telling me that my uncle, he's responsible for my mother's death?" Elliot reached out, his hand hovering just above her shoulder, unsure if she would accept his comfort. "Yes. He wanted control over the family's fortune. Lydia wanted to start a new life with me, and he couldn't stand the thought of losing everything he believed was his. So, he made sure she never got the chance." Naomi shook her head, backing away from him, her face twisted with disbelief. This is insane. It sounds like some kind of nightmare. How am I supposed to believe that? Elliot's own eyes filled with tears, his voice breaking as he spoke. I know it's hard to accept, Naomi. I wish I could change what happened, but I promise you, I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped hoping that you might still be out there, somewhere. And now that I've found you, I don't want to lose you again. Naomi collapsed onto the armchair, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. Elliot knelt beside her, hesitating before placing a gentle hand on her back. I'm here, Naomi. Whatever you need, I'm here. For a long time, they stayed like that, Naomi crying, Elliot struggling with his own emotions, unsure of how to console her. Eventually, Naomi's sobs quieted, and she looked up, her eyes red and puffy, her expression still clouded with hurt. Why didn't you tell me sooner, Elliot? Why keep it a secret? Elliot's shoulders sagged, the guilt of his decision weighing on him. I didn't want to scare you. I thought maybe you'd think I was crazy, or that you'd never believe me. And I wanted to be sure before I told you the truth. But I know now that I should have trusted you with it from the start. Naomi wiped her eyes, taking a shuddering breath. I don't know what to do with all of this. It's too much. Elliot nodded, his own heart heavy with the weight of everything they had uncovered. I understand, but you don't have to face it alone. I'm here for you, Naomi, whatever you decide. She looked at him, and for the first time, Elliot thought he saw a glimmer of something other than pain in her eyes, something like hope. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds of 23 years of separation, but it was a beginning. Before either of them could say more, Elliot's phone buzzed on the desk, the sudden sound shattering the fragile quiet between them. He glanced at the screen and froze. It was a text from an unknown number. You should have stayed out of this, Elliot. Now you'll both pay. His blood ran cold. He knew without a doubt that it was from Russell, a final threat before he made his next move. Elliot's gaze snapped to Naomi, the fear in his eyes mirroring her own. We need to get out of here, Naomi, he said urgently, grabbing her hand and pulling her to her feet. We're not safe. She didn't ask any questions, just nodded, her expression hardening as she followed him out of the study. As they hurried through the mansion's halls, Elliot's mind raced with 1,000 plans and contingencies. He couldn't let Russell win, not after everything they had uncovered, not after finally finding Naomi. He just hoped that he could keep her safe long enough to finish what Lydia had started all those years ago. Elliot's heart pounded in his chest as he led Naomi through the side entrance of the mansion. His hands shook as he fumbled with his car keys, his mind racing through the options. He knew Russell wouldn't wait long to make his move. The message had been clear. Russell was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. Naomi's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear as she clutched her bag to her chest. Elliot, what's happening? Why is he threatening us? I don't understand. Elliot squeezed her hand, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm going to explain everything, I promise, but right now, we need to get somewhere safe. They climbed into Elliot's car, and he sped out of the driveway, glancing in the rearview mirror to make sure no one was following them. His mind raced through the possible places they could go. Somewhere Russell wouldn't think to look. Somewhere they could regroup and plan their next steps. Finally, he decided on a small cabin he owned on the outskirts of Savannah, a place he rarely visited anymore but that offered enough seclusion to keep them hidden, at least for a while. The drive felt endless, with the weight of the danger pressing down on them. Naomi sat silently in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Elliot stole glances at her, the pain in her expression cutting deeper than any physical wound. He wished he could say something to make it all better, to make the past disappear, but he knew that wasn't possible. When they finally reached the cabin, Elliot parked the car behind a row of trees and ushered Naomi inside, locking the door behind them. The cabin was small, rustic, but it had everything they needed: running water, a working fireplace, and most importantly, a sense of isolation from the rest of the world. Naomi sank into a chair near the fireplace, her hands trembling as she stared into the darkened room. "I don't understand why this is happening," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It feels like a nightmare. 1 minute, I'm just me. And now I'm supposed to be your daughter. And someone wants to hurt us." Elliot knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. He could see the confusion and fear in her eyes, and he wished he could take it all away. "I know, Naomi. It's a lot to take in. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. But right now, I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that I'll keep you safe." She looked at him, her expression torn between hope and doubt. "You really believe he'll try to hurt us? Your own brother-in-law?" Elliot hesitated, thinking back to the way Russell's eyes had glinted with malice during their confrontation, the way he had spoken about Lydia with such casual cruelty. "I think Russell is capable of anything if he feels cornered. And right now, he knows that we're close to exposing the truth." Naomi swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. "What are we going to do, Elliot? We can't just hide here forever." Elliot nodded, standing up and pacing the small living room. "I have a plan. Tomorrow morning, I'll go into town and make a call to the authorities. Quietly. I'll tell them everything I've found, every piece of evidence we have. They'll put a watch on him, and hopefully, we can keep you safe until they make an arrest." Naomi nodded slowly, but her expression remained uncertain. "And what if that doesn't work? What if he finds us before then?" Elliot stopped pacing, turning to face her with a determined look in his eyes. "Then we fight back, Naomi. I won't let him take anything more from us." For the rest of the night, they sat by the fireplace, talking in hushed voices. Elliot shared stories of Lydia, memories of their time together, the dreams they had once had for a family, the plans that had been stolen from them. Naomi listened, her expression softening as she learned more about the woman who had brought her into the world, the mother she had never known. "It's strange," Naomi murmured after a long silence, her gaze distant. "I always felt like there was a part of me missing, like there was this hole in my heart that I couldn't explain. And now it makes sense, I guess." Elliot reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, Naomi. We're going to get through this together, no matter what." She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and managed a small, wavering smile. "Thank you, Elliot, for everything." They tried to rest after that, but the tension in the cabin was palpable, every creak of the wooden floorboards setting Elliot's nerves on edge. He kept a watchful eye on the window, his mind racing with contingency plans. He knew that the next few hours would be crucial. They couldn't afford any mistakes. Just as the first light of dawn crept through the trees, Elliot decided it was time to act. He left Naomi with a burner phone, instructing her to call the police if anything went wrong, and then slipped out into the early morning fog. The drive back into town felt like walking into a trap, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. He needed to stay sharp if they were going to get through this. He parked a few blocks away from a small payphone by the side of the road, an old relic that still served its purpose in emergencies like this. Elliot dialed the number of the local detective he had spoken with during his initial investigations into Naomi's past, explaining the urgency of the situation. He recounted everything he had uncovered, from the DNA results to Russell's threats. The detective's voice was skeptical at first, but as Elliot laid out the evidence, the tone shifted to one of concern. "All right, Mr. Parker, I'll have officers on standby near your brother-in-law's home. But if he's as dangerous as you say, I recommend keeping a low profile until we have him in custody." Elliot hung up, feeling a small measure of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He knew better than to assume that Russell would go down without a fight. But at least now, they had some backup. As he made his way back to the car, however, a flicker of movement in the alley caught his eye. A shadowy figure stood just out of sight, and Elliot felt a chill run down his spine. He turned, ready to confront whoever was watching him, but the figure slipped away into the shadows before he could react. Elliot's mind raced. Was it one of Russell's men sent to keep an eye on him? Or was it just paranoia playing tricks on his mind? Either way, he knew he couldn't afford to waste time. He hurried back to the car and drove back to the cabin, his pulse quickening with each mile. When he reached the cabin, he found Naomi waiting on the porch, her expression anxious. Did everything go okay? Elliot nodded, forcing a reassuring smile. Yes, the police are going to keep an eye on him. We just need to stay here and wait it out. But as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the shadow he had seen in the alley was more than just a trick of the light. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the woman standing before him, the daughter he had only just found. As they stepped back into the cabin, Elliot resolved to stay vigilant. He had already lost too much to Russell's schemes, and he would do whatever it took to protect Naomi from the darkness that still threatened to consume them both. The air in the cabin was thick with tension. Elliot tried to keep a calm demeanor, but the truth was that every sound outside made him jump. The creak of a branch, the distant call of a bird, it all set his nerves on edge. He kept glancing out the window, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Naomi, sensing his anxiety, stayed close by, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. Morning turned into afternoon, and Elliot's unease grew with each passing hour. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He reassured Naomi as best as he could, but the shadow of Russell's threats loomed large over them. The isolation of the cabin, which had seemed like a refuge at first, now felt like a trap, with no one around for miles. By late afternoon, Elliot heard the sound of a car engine in the distance. He stiffened, motioning for Naomi to stay quiet. He crept to the window, peering through the narrow gap in the curtains. A dark SUV appeared through the trees, rolling slowly down the dirt road that led to the cabin. It came to a stop just out of sight, hidden behind a thick cluster of pines. Elliot's heart pounded. He didn't need to see the driver to know who it was. "Naomi, we have to go. Now," he whispered urgently, grabbing the car keys from the kitchen counter. Naomi's face went pale as she realized what was happening. Is it him? Did he find us? Elliot nodded grimly, his mind racing through their options. I don't know how he tracked us down, but we can't stay here. We need to get to the car and drive. Before he could finish, the front door shuddered under a heavy blow. Naomi flinched, her eyes wide with panic. Elliot grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back door. Stay close, don't look back, he urged, his voice low and steady despite the fear gripping his chest. They slipped out the back, the cool air biting against their skin as they ran toward Elliot's car parked behind the trees. Another crash came from inside the cabin, the sound of the front door splintering open. Elliot glanced back and saw a shadowy figure stepping through the shattered doorway. He and Naomi reached the car, and Elliot fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. The engine roared to life just as a shot rang out, the sound cracking through the air like a thunderclap. Elliot threw the car into gear, gravel spraying beneath the tires as they sped down the dirt road, weaving between the trees. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Russell emerging from the cabin, a gun clutched in his hand. Naomi's breaths came in sharp, panicked gasps as she clutched the armrest, her knuckles white. Elliot, he's going to catch up with us. We're not going to let him, Elliot said through gritted teeth, pushing the car faster along the winding path. He knew the back roads well, knew where the turns were sharpest and where they could gain some distance. But Russell's SUV loomed behind them, gaining speed, its headlights flashing like eyes in the shadows. They reached a narrow bridge over a creek, the wood creaking beneath the car's weight. Elliot's mind raced. He needed a way to slow Russell down, to buy them time. As soon as they crossed the bridge, he swerved the car off the main road, pulling to a stop behind a thicket of trees. Naomi looked at him, panic and confusion in her eyes. What are you doing? Why are we stopping? Elliot held up a hand, his voice a harsh whisper. Trust me, he'll think we kept driving straight. Just stay quiet. They sat in tense silence, the engine idling softly. Elliot strained his ears, listening for the sound of Russell's SUV. Seconds later, it roared past them, tearing down the road and disappearing into the distance. Elliot let out a slow breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles ached. Naomi's shoulders sagged with relief, but her voice was still tight with fear. What now? He'll realize soon that we tricked him. He'll come back. Elliot nodded, putting the car back into gear. I know. We need to get to the police station before he does. It's our only chance. They pulled back onto the road, heading toward the nearest town. Elliot kept his speed steady, careful not to draw attention in case Russell doubled back. He glanced at Naomi, whose face was pale and drawn, her eyes staring straight ahead. He reached over, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. We're almost there, Naomi. Just hold on a little longer. She nodded, though her voice trembled when she spoke. I'm just scared, Elliot. I don't want to lose anyone else. Elliot's chest tightened at her words. You won't, he promised, more fiercely than he had intended. I won't let him hurt you. They reached the town just as dusk began to fall, the streetlights flickering on. Elliot parked the car near the police station, scanning the area for any sign of Russell's SUV. Satisfied that they weren't being followed, he led Naomi inside, where they were met by the detective he had spoken to earlier. Mr. Parker, Miss Bennett, the detective greeted them, his expression serious. We've been keeping an eye on Russell Thomas. There's a warrant out for his arrest, but he hasn't been spotted yet. What happened? Elliot quickly explained the events of the past few hours, detailing how Russell had found them at the cabin and fired at them as they fled. The detective's expression grew graver with each word. All right. We'll dispatch officers to search the area and keep you both under protective custody until we can locate him. As the officers moved into action, Naomi clung to Elliot's arm, her breath shaky. What if he finds us before they do? Elliot wrapped an arm around her shoulders, trying to shield her from the fear that he couldn't fully keep at bay. They won't let that happen, and I won't either. Just stay with me, okay? The detective led them into a secure room, offering them coffee and blankets while they waited for news. Naomi sat close to Elliot, her hands wrapped around the warm mug as if trying to draw strength from it. They spoke little, the silence between them filled with unspoken fears and the lingering echoes of everything they had endured. Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity. Outside the window, the night deepened, the shadows growing longer. Elliot kept checking his watch, his nerves fraying with each passing second. He couldn't help but wonder where Russell was, what he might be planning. He knew that his brother-in-law wouldn't give up easily, not after everything he had done to keep his secrets buried. Just as Elliot's thoughts began to spiral, the door to the room swung open, and the detective stepped inside, his expression grim. We found his SUV abandoned near the bridge, but there's no sign of him yet. We think he's still in the area, possibly hiding out until he can make another move. Elliot felt a cold knot of dread settle in his stomach. He glanced at Naomi, who met his gaze with a look of determination. Despite her fear, there was a steely resolve in her eyes that made him believe they could get through this. Together. Whatever happens, I won't let him take anything more from us, Elliot said quietly, squeezing Naomi's hand. We're going to see this through. Naomi nodded, taking a deep breath as she straightened her shoulders. I'm ready. They both knew that the final confrontation with Russell was coming, and that it would be a battle not just for their lives, but for the truth that had been hidden for so long. Elliot could only hope that when the time came, they would have the strength to face whatever darkness still lay ahead. The night pressed on, thick with tension, as Elliot and Naomi remained in the secure room at the police station. Outside, officers moved in and out, their radios crackling with updates as they coordinated the search for Russell. The sense of urgency in their voices was a stark reminder that this wasn't over yet. Elliot tried to focus on the warmth of the coffee in his hands, but his mind kept drifting back to the fear in Naomi's eyes and the desperate finality of Russell's threats. Naomi leaned against the back of the chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Elliot, do you think this will ever end? Or will we always be looking over our shoulders? Elliot's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand, squeezing it gently. I promise you, it will end. He won't keep us living in fear forever, and when this is over, we'll be able to start fresh. No more secrets, no more running. She managed a faint smile, but the worry didn't fully leave her face. I want to believe that. I really do. It's just hard after everything. Elliot nodded, understanding her hesitation. He had spent so many years trying to bury his pain, to find peace in a world without Lydia. And now, the wounds had been ripped open again. But this time, he had something to fight for, someone to protect. That thought kept him anchored, even as the night wore on. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open, and the detective stepped inside, his face set in grim lines. We've got a lead. One of our patrols spotted movement near the old train yard, about a mile from here. We think it might be Russell. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. You have to let me come with you, he said, rising to his feet. If it's him, I need to be there. He's after Naomi because of me. The detective hesitated, glancing between Elliot and Naomi. I understand your concern, Mr. Parker, but it's not safe. Naomi stood up, her voice firm. He's right. Russell won't stop unless Elliot is there. He needs to hear it from Elliot's own mouth, that it's over. The detective studied their faces for a long moment before finally nodding. All right, but you stay behind the line, both of you. We'll do our jobs, but if it helps to have you there to keep him talking, then so be it. Elliot and Naomi exchanged a glance, a shared understanding passing between them. This was their chance to face the man who had taken so much from them. They followed the detective outside, where a convoy of patrol cars was waiting. Naomi climbed into the back seat of one star, with Elliot sliding in beside her, the weight of the moment settling heavily between them. The drive to the train yard felt surreal, the city's lights fading into darkness as they neared the outskirts. The train yard was a sprawling, rusting maze of old cars and tracks, abandoned long ago but perfect for someone looking to disappear. Elliot scanned the shadows, his jaw clenched with determination. The police set up a perimeter around the yard, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they moved cautiously among the derelict cars. Elliot stayed close to Naomi, watching her face as they advanced toward the center of the yard. She was holding up better than he expected, her expression set with a steely determination that reminded him of Lydia. As they reached the heart of the train yard, a voice rang out, echoing among the metal husks. Well, well, look who finally found their courage. Elliot's breath caught in his throat as he turned toward the voice. Russell stepped out from behind an old freight car, a gun glinting in his hand. His face was twisted into a mocking grin, but there was a wildness in his eyes, a desperation that made Elliot's blood run cold. Naomi stiffened beside him, her hands balling into fists. Why are you doing this? She demanded, her voice rising with anger. Why couldn't you just leave us alone? Russell's smile faded, replaced by a sneer. You think I wanted it to come to this, girl? All I wanted was for my sister to respect the family, to understand what was at stake. But she had to go and ruin everything, falling for him, getting pregnant. She was going to destroy everything we built. Elliot stepped forward, trying to draw Russell's focus away from Naomi. You didn't have to do it, Russell. You didn't have to hurt her, or hide Naomi away. You did it because you were afraid of losing control. Russell's expression twisted with rage. You have no idea what it's like, Elliot. You think you're the hero, but you were always the outsider, always trying to take what wasn't yours. Elliot held his ground, his voice calm but edged with fury. I never wanted anything from you, Russell. I just wanted to be with Lydia. And now, I want to make sure Naomi is safe no matter what it takes. Russell's grip on the gun tightened, his hands trembling with barely contained anger. You think you can take her away from me now after everything I've done to keep this quiet? You're a fool, Elliot. Before Elliot could respond, Russell's finger twitched on the trigger, and a shot rang out, reverberating through the yard. Elliot flinched, but the bullet went wide, striking the side of an old train car with a deafening clang. The officers moved in, their guns raised, shouting for Russell to drop his weapon. But Russell's eyes were wild, and he swung the gun back toward Naomi, his expression twisted with desperation. "You don't get to take everything from me," he shouted, his voice cracking. Elliot's heart lurched, and he threw himself in front of Naomi, bracing for the worst. But before Russell could fire again, one of the officers tackled him from the side, sending him crashing to the ground. The gun clattered out of his hand, skidding across the gravel. The officers swarmed over him, pinning his arms behind his back as they cuffed him. Russell struggled, spewing curses, but Elliot barely heard them. He turned to Naomi, who stood frozen, her face pale with shock. Elliot wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as she buried her face in his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. "It's over, Naomi," he whispered, holding her tightly. "It's over." She clung to him, her breath hitching as she tried to process everything that had just happened. The officers led Russell away, his face contorted with fury as he was shoved into the back of a patrol car. For a moment, he met Elliot's gaze, his eyes burning with hatred, but Elliot felt only a cold sense of finality. The nightmare that Russell had unleashed was finally coming to an end. The detective approached them, his expression softened with sympathy. "We've got him. He won't be hurting anyone anymore. You did well, both of you." Elliot nodded, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you. For everything." As the last of the police cars drove away, Elliot and Naomi stood in the train yard, surrounded by the wreckage of the past but free to face whatever came next. The night air was cool against their skin, and for the first time in a long time, Elliot felt a glimmer of hope. He looked down at Naomi, who met his gaze with a small, tremulous smile. "We made it," she whispered, as if saying the words out loud would make them real. Elliot squeezed her hand, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "Yes, we did. And now, we can finally start over." The drive back to Savannah was quiet, the city lights casting long shadows as Elliot and Naomi made their way through the darkened streets. The adrenaline that had fueled them through the night was starting to fade, leaving behind a heavy exhaustion that settled in their bones. But despite the weariness, there was a sense of relief in the air, like they had crossed a threshold and left something terrible behind. Elliot glanced at Naomi, who sat beside him in the car, her face turned toward the window as she watched the city blur by. Her expression was pensive, her thoughts clearly far away. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "How are you holding up?" Naomi took a deep breath, turning to face him. "I don't know. It's like I'm waking up from a bad dream, but everything's still blurry. I thought finding out about my parents would give me answers, but now I just feel more lost." Elliot nodded, understanding her turmoil. He had spent years trying to bury the past, and now that it had come roaring back, he knew how disorienting it could be. "I can't pretend to know what you're going through, Naomi, but you don't have to go through it alone. We have time now to figure this out, to figure us out." She offered a small, tentative smile, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I think I'd like that, Elliot. To have time to get to know you, to get to know myself." Elliot's chest tightened with emotion, and he nodded, feeling a flicker of hope light up inside him. "We'll take it one day at a time, and we'll make sure that what Russell did, everything he tried to hide, it won't define us." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, a newfound understanding settling between them. When they arrived at Elliot's mansion, he noticed how different it felt. No longer just a monument to memories, but a place where something new could begin. He led Naomi inside, offering her one of the guest rooms, but she hesitated in the hallway, glancing at him uncertainly. "Would it be okay if we talked a little more?" she asked softly. "I don't think I'm ready to sleep just yet." Elliot smiled gently. "Of course. Let's sit by the fire." They settled in the living room, the fireplace crackling with warmth. Elliot poured them each a cup of tea, and they sat together on the sofa, the glow of the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Naomi looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the framed photos of Lydia that adorned the shelves. "Tell me more about her," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About my mother. What was she like?" Elliot's expression softened as he thought back to the woman he had loved so deeply. She was everything. Smart, strong-willed, always so full of life. She could light up a room just by walking into it. But she had a gentleness too, a way of making people feel seen, like they mattered. She wanted the world to be a better place, and she believed we could make it that way together. Naomi listened intently, her hands wrapped around her tea mug, as if trying to absorb every word. "I wish I could remember her," she said quietly, a hint of longing in her voice. "But maybe, through you, I can." Elliot's heart ached for her. He wished he could give her back all the years that had been stolen, but he knew that the only way forward was to embrace the time they had now. "You have her spirit, Naomi. I see it in you every day. The way you face challenges, the way you care about others. She would have been so proud of the woman you've become." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, and she reached out to grasp Elliot's hand. "Thank you, Elliot, for finding me, for giving me a chance to know where I come from." Elliot squeezed her hand, his own voice thick with emotion. "I'm the one who's grateful. You've given me a chance to be a father, to have a family again. I thought I'd lost that forever." They sat together, sharing memories and thoughts until the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the room, Naomi finally leaned back, a look of peace settling over her features for the first time in days. Elliot watched her, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in 20 years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find happiness again, together. A knock on the front door broke the quiet moment, and Elliot's heart skipped a beat. He exchanged a wary glance with Naomi, but she nodded, urging him to check who it was. He walked to the door, his pulse quickening as he opened it to find the detective standing on the porch. "Mr. Parker," the detective said, his expression somber but not unkind. "I thought you'd want to know. Russell has been formally charged. We've got him in custody. With your testimony and the evidence, he's facing a long time behind bars." Elliot let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Relief washed over him, mingled with a bittersweet satisfaction. "Thank you, Detective. I appreciate everything you've done." The detective nodded, glancing past Elliot into the house, where Naomi stood in the entryway, her expression hopeful. "She's been through a lot, but she's tough. I think you both have a chance at a new start." Elliot managed a small smile. "That's what we're hoping for." As the detective left, Elliot closed the door behind him and turned to face Naomi, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "It's over, Naomi. He's going to pay for what he did." Naomi let out a shaky breath, a few tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't think I'd ever hear those words. That it was over." Elliot moved closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as he guided her back into the living room. "It is over, and now we get to decide what comes next." They stood together by the window, watching as the first rays of morning painted the garden in soft light. The mansion felt different now, like it had shed the shadows of the past and was ready to welcome something new. Elliot rested a hand on Naomi's back, a sense of quiet resolve settling over him. "I was thinking," he began, glancing at her with a gentle smile, "maybe we could visit the places that were important to Lydia, to your mother, the places she loved, the ones we dreamed of showing you someday. It might be a way to honor her memory, to help us heal." Naomi looked up at him, a tearful smile breaking through her sadness. "I'd like that, Elliot. I'd like that a lot." They stood in silence for a moment longer, letting the promise of a new day wash over them. Elliot knew that they still had a long road ahead, filled with questions, with healing, with learning to trust each other fully. But for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a gift. "Come on," Elliot said softly, guiding Naomi back into the warmth of the house. "Let's get some rest. We have a lot to look forward to." As they walked together through the halls, Elliot felt the ghosts of the past begin to fade, replaced by the steady beat of hope. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew this. They had found their way back to each other, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The following days passed in a quiet blur. For the first time in a long while, Elliot and Naomi could breathe without the weight of fear pressing down on their shoulders. Russell remained behind bars, facing a long list of charges that would ensure he wouldn't harm them, or anyone else, again. But as the legal proceedings took their course, Elliot and Naomi focused on something much more important: the slow process of building a relationship that had been denied to them for so long. Elliot made good on his promise to take Naomi to the places that had once been special to Lydia. They visited the lake where Elliot and Lydia had spent lazy summer afternoons, the small cafe where she had insisted on ordering the same raspberry tart every weekend, and the little library she had adored, with its high windows and cozy reading nooks. Each place carried echoes of a life Elliot had thought lost. But with Naomi by his side, those memories began to feel less like a source of pain and more like a bridge between past and present. One afternoon, they drove out to a quiet spot along the river, where the trees formed a gentle canopy overhead. Naomi stood by the water's edge, the breeze tugging at her hair as she looked out over the shimmering surface. Elliot joined her, his hands tucked into his pockets, letting the peaceful silence settle between them. "Do you ever feel like she's still here with us?" Naomi asked softly, not taking her eyes off the river. "Like she's watching over us somehow?" Elliot nodded, a small, bittersweet smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I do. I think she'd be happy to see us together like this, to see that we're trying to move forward even after everything." Naomi turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I used to think I'd never understand where I came from, why my life turned out the way it did. But now, with you, I feel like I'm starting to understand, and I think maybe I can find peace with it." Elliot reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You will, Naomi. We both will. It won't happen overnight, but I believe we can find that peace, together." She offered him a smile, genuine and unguarded, and for a moment, they stood there, letting the tranquility of the river wash over them. It felt like a new beginning, one that neither of them had expected, but both of them were determined to embrace. The next morning, Elliot made a decision that had been weighing on his mind since the day he had discovered Naomi's true identity. He invited her into his study and gestured for her to sit in one of the plush leather chairs. Naomi looked at him curiously, sensing the seriousness of the moment. "There's something I want to do for you, Naomi," Elliot began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I know you've spent most of your life wondering who you are, where you belong, and I want you to know that you belong here. With me, with your family." Naomi blinked, clearly caught off guard by his words. "Elliot, I don't know what to say. You've already done so much for me." Elliot shook his head, a determined glint in his eyes. "This isn't about repayment. It's about making things right. I want to make it official. I'd like to legally adopt you, Naomi, to give you the name you should have had all along, if you want it." Naomi's breath caught, and her eyes welled up with tears. She reached out, her hands trembling as she grasped Elliot's. I'd like that too. I never thought I'd have a chance to be part of a real family. To be part of your family." Elliot's throat tightened with emotion, and he pulled her into a tight hug, holding her close as she cried softly against his shoulder. It felt like a promise, a commitment to the future they were building together, a future that would honor Lydia's memory while forging a path of their own. Over the next few weeks, they worked through the legal process, meeting with lawyers and signing papers. Naomi officially became Naomi Parker, a name that she wore with a mixture of pride and a sense of belonging she had never known before. The day they received the final paperwork, Elliot took her out to celebrate, treating her to dinner at her favorite restaurant. They laughed and reminisced, sharing stories that no longer carried the heavy weight of secrets. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when the grief would return, catching them off guard. When Naomi would stumble upon an old photograph of Lydia, or when Elliot would find himself standing alone in the nursery they had once planned to fill with laughter. But they faced those moments together, knowing that the pain was a reminder of the love they had lost, but also of the love they had found again. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Naomi turned to Elliot with a thoughtful look in her eyes. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what I want to do with my life now that I have the chance to start over." Elliot raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what have you come up with?" Naomi hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I think I'd like to go back to school. Maybe study social work, or something where I can help kids who grew up like I did, kids who feel like they don't have a place in the world." Elliot's smile widened, and he felt a surge of pride swell in his chest. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Naomi. You'd be incredible at it. And whatever you need to make it happen, I'm right here to support you." She beamed at him,